to another episode of the Crypto Gaming Institute, episode number 34. It's a lucky number for some reason that I don't know. But anyways, Nathan, welcome to the show today. You are a total badass. Co-founder.
Well, that's really sweet of you to say. And I'm going to tell my whole family that you call me that because they're going to not believe me. But super cool of you. And
they should believe me. They should believe me. I have a microphone and I'm on the internet, so it's legitimate, right?
Yeah,
Nathan, you are a best-selling author, Emmy-winner, co-founder of Technology, Humans, and Taste, and also the Oratory Laboratory, I believe. You've had a ridiculously cool career. Maybe you could give us a crash course on you, and I'd really love to hear your story of how you got to where you are today.
Cool. I appreciate it. I'm now full screen of myself, which is the worst way to be on camera. But basically, I started my career in an improv group in Providence, Rhode Island, as a teenager who was lying about his age. So I told them I went to Brown and basically spent my high school years not partying or drinking or doing anything like that, but doing improvised theater in a little black box. And I was a writer, and everything I did as a performer involved the audience. I started to really fall in love with this idea of entering into the empty space and just starting a conversation with a room full of people. And the more time I spent doing that, the more my writing started to kind of support it. So I started creating shows which kind of in the spirit of immersive theater, would invite people into a space and then start to look at them as the protagonist by giving them different types of choices, allowing them to kind of start to change the shape of the story and do broadly what we know as interactive storytelling. The more interactive the pieces got, the more I wanted to lean on technology. Because it allows you to scale the audience, right? You don't have to be in the room if you're able to connect through a phone or through a computer. But it also makes this idea of choice making much simpler. So if you're in a live experience, you have to get people to raise their hand or say something. But if you start to connect digitally, you can really start to play with what it means to make a choice and change an experience. So along the way, that kind of manifests as a couple of different things. And I'll just use what you kind of listed at the beginning. But I, with a woman who's now my wife and mother of my two little girls, started a company called the Oratory Laboratory, which is a speech writing company. And that came from a need of simply hearing people, at weddings and stuff, trying to communicate their deepest thoughts, their incredible emotions, and realizing that there wasn't really a system for them to do that. They needed help. And it wasn't that they didn't feel the feelings. It's just that sometimes actually doing the math to employ the verbal technology required to hit an audience the way you want them to be hit requires, a system of thinking that they didn't have. So that's that company, and Victoria's book, Before You Say Anything, comes out in April. Along the way, my book was called The Unorthodox Haggadah. I'm a Jewish convert, but I loved the idea of Passover as a game mechanic. It's a holiday which is interesting because there's no dogma. The only rules are that you have to ask questions and tell a story. So I approached Passover from the perspective of someone who knew nothing about it, did my own research, got really smart about it, and identified all of these cool, crazy rituals that people have developed. So every Passover, I host a dinner, invite people online. You can all come. And also the book is available at your favorite bookstore, and it allows you to kind of play this gamified experience to ask really big questions. And I will say that I feel like this intro maybe has gone off the rails a little bit.
I love it.
Along the way, made a bunch of stuff for different museums around finding ways to, for example, translate books into SMS experiences and create interactive experiences that allowed people to really be the star of the show. And one thing, the last kind of self-reflective nod that I'll give is the Emmy that you mentioned was for a project called The And, which is still really popular. It's their card games. You can get a YouTube series where we actually wrote questions for couples. And all of those questions have an answer, but you'd never ask them, like, why do you love me? Or what would it take for you to leave me? And then we shot these films and cut them up into just questions and answers and made a web experience where you kind of talk about yourself, and then the machine constructs a documentary film about you, but starring all these people. So the big through line, which is very relevant to gaming and very relevant to crypto, is how do you, rather than tell a story that takes place in the past tense, create a narrative construct within which people can create their own story.
That is unbelievably cool. And I think one of the common threads is almost you're empowering people to be creative within no confines. Like you're giving people the ability it feels almost like you're giving people intangible tools to be creative and to like let their own creativity out.
Yeah, and I think it's I think about it in terms of a lot of like interactive creativity. I think about through the lens of wish fulfillment. And it's like, what is standing in the way of this person doing the thing they want to do, right? So often, especially in digital experiences, you think about getting users, trying to get them to do something. But when it comes to engaging people as creators, the way I think about it is like, well, what do these people want to do and how do we make it easier? And my favorite example of that is Happy Birthday, where you can walk into a room full of people that you don't know, and all you have to do is say, "Hey, everybody, it's Ben's birthday. 1, 2, 3," and everyone starts singing. And we all want that all the time, right? Now, I don't know if that's creativity or just like kind of unrepressing what we really want to be doing, but giving permission to people, and then a system that allows them to start kind of participating, concepting, to me is always really rewarding and definitely a big focus.
So maybe you could tell us a little bit about I don't know if it's an interest or because I'm not exactly sure how you view the metaverse completely, but
Mm-hmm.
how is that relevant to you? Like, how do you see it? How do you view it? I believe you're doing a lot of work to actually help shape it and be an integral part of it. But I really just want to hear it from you. Like, how did that come onto your radar? And then, like, what role are you playing? And how are you kind of jumping into the metaverse?
Yeah, I appreciate the question, and I will do my best to answer it because it's a big one. First, the way that I conceive of the metaverse, and for the 5 years we've been in business, we have a reading list that people get when they get a job at that, and it includes Snow Crash, because I think it's really interesting in the book that a lot of it is not about the technology, it's about the metaphor, the magic of it, right? The cultural rules of the metaverse and how it manifests itself. So for me, the way that I think about it is media agnostic. I think that everything around you can be included in the metaverse, and every object or device that can be impacted by a choice is then kind of a portal, right? So the way I think about it is in the context of touch points and entry points. So the world is filled with touch points, and you can think about those as things that tell you something, right? Things that to engage with them, you have to listen. So like a tree is a touch point because a tree is kind of a tree, and this is a tree, and I don't do anything. A TV commercial is a touch point. But this camera is an entry point. Anything that can start to record something, start to listen to me. And so if you look at the world around you through the lens of touch points and entry points, you realize that it's pervasive, the opportunity for choice. So as a creator, the way that I try to approach it is not really worrying about what the touch points and entry points are, but what are cool choices, right? Like what are cool things we can float out there that people can then engage with and start to manifest in all of these entry points. So bread stapled to trees is a great example, which is a subreddit I follow, where people looked around at trees, and trees have been the same for as long as trees have been around, and somebody started stapling bread to them. And all of a sudden it becomes a community. Now, why is that? It's not because of the bread, it's not because of the staple, it's about the choice to do it. And it's about the like deep absurdity, right? The absolute lack of stakes and the surreality of, oh, I'm doing this because there are people that do this. And all of a sudden, you've got conversation that extends out of that. And now you've got a community inside the metaverse that's the bread staple to trees community. Now, if you fast forward 50 years from now, right, people start to develop relationships, and stapling bread to trees will start to take on a cultural significance. And that to me is what happens later in this journey through the metaverse, is when the choices we're making now start to take on their own meaning. And so the second part of the question was like, how am I engaging with it? And I wrote an article about how if you are a socially responsible person, the most important job you can have right now is to work in advertising. And the reason I said something like that is because the entities right now that are incentivized to build the metaverse are the companies that want to create an environment that contains people, right? A company wants people to be in a choice-driven environment so they can extract data and figure out how to better target them with advertising. So currently, the kind of creative economy is based on targeting people with ads, lots of touch points. But if we work in advertising and can start to create experiences that include entry points, that include invitations to participate, and we can prove that that's successful, those brand built worlds will start to be optimized for those richer experiences, for those high friction experiences. And if we can do that, we're building a future that actually has more to do with what people choose to do, as opposed to where people are just receiving messaging. So that is a organization. We have an originals group. We make a lot of stuff for social good, but we generate revenue by working with brands. And we're really proud of the work that we do. But it all is premised on the idea of giving people a choice to create a better digital future that has a more ethical and kind of equitable relationship to people's data and the experiences they have.
There's so many things here. I want to kind of jump back to the tree example and this idea of like a touch point versus an entry point, because I actually think that that's going to blend much more than we think very, very quickly with augmented reality and then eventually virtual reality. Because what happens when we get to a place where, yes, it's a tree, but we put on glasses and we, like, depending on whether we wave to it with our left hand or our right hand, the tree may grow arms and like wave back, or it may grow feet and just start dancing or something, right? Like I think augmented reality actually gives us the ability to almost digitally terraform everything around us and
For sure.
make everything an entry point, and not, well, both an entry point and a touch point. So when you're thinking about, and I'm really curious because you're like on the forefront of thinking with this, how do you see the shift from where we are now to like this idea of really being a part of the metaverse in a really immersive way? Like, what is that going to look like? What's the transition going to look like?
I think it's an awesome question. And I think, again, to take the technology out of it, there is an invisible layer of information all around us, right? Now, some of that is 5G waves and LTE and all that stuff that's floating around. We can make that visible. And it was there before. Making it visible, though, is just a data visualization that allows us to engage with it in a different way. Included in that invisible world is everything that you imagine. And those are just the weird things you think in your head walking down the street. But there's also like the stories that have yet to be written. So when we think about an AR experience around a tree, it's important to understand that the tree doesn't change. The tree is the tree, and the tree will always only ever be the tree, right? Even embedding technology into the tree, it's still a tree. It just has this other stuff in it.
Cyborg tree.
Yeah. Whoa, I'm buying it. The invisible world, right? That's a huge creative opportunity. Now, The transition, I think, is going to happen one of two ways. I'm going to talk about the one that I think is probably going to happen, and then I'm going to talk about the one that I would advocate for. So when you introduce like a new medium, a lot of the time it can change the way people think. So the Gutenberg press, right? Prior to the Gutenberg press, most of the books that were printed were Bibles, and those were held by clergy, right? The educated class and the wealthy class, and they distributed what was inside out to everybody else. So people would listen to that story and be like, okay, that's the story, right? But the Gutenberg press comes out and starts printing a lot of stuff, but like also a lot of Bibles. Now people are at home and they're like, I'm gonna skip that part. Wait a second. They can reread it. And all of a sudden they control this story. And what happens? God dies, right? Democracy is created. All sorts of things happen and transpire. What's important to understand is that the Gutenberg press started by printing the same thing that people cared about the most, this very simple story that people could already dive in and were familiar with. Now, if you fast forward now to much more deep technology, much more immersive stuff with way more functionality, when we step into a VR experience, all too often, people try to write a whole new story, right? So it's like you start with, I'm making my first VR experience ever. It's like Star Wars in VR. And it's like, cool. As a film watcher, you want it to be Star Wars of VR. But if you think about yourself as a storyteller, like you're not ready to tell the story of Star Wars. And that's why so much interactive stuff is lame, is because we just don't know how to tell those stories. So what I love is a transition where we start from the beginning, right? Really, really simple stories, really simple interactions that allow us to start to learn what it means to tell stories in 3D and to make this invisible world visible. Really, really simple storytelling. And I think if we can do that, like I made a virtual reality sock puppet, right? So it was like a kind of a sensor and a piece of cardboard, and you were in Google Cardboard, and you could place a sock puppet in VR and record a voice and it would stay there. Like, let's learn how to do that. Right. And then build forward. Right now, we're like jumping to the end and people are just making stuff that, like, I don't know if it's really taking advantage of the technology so much as just kind of like aping the stuff that we already know and turning it into collectible NFTs.
That's fascinating. I think a lot of why that's happening is because we all see Ready Player One as like, oh, this could happen, and this is where we think a lot of things are going, and then it's like, okay, well, let's just go straight there. It's like let's just get to it as quickly as possible. It's interesting that you would say to kind of start off almost. I think what I'm kind of hearing is you advocating for like walk before you run.
Mm-hmm. Walk before you run, and also don't like explore. Like when you say Ready Player One, are you referring to the book? Are you referring to the film? Or are you referring to the game experience within the book that was created so that readers could win a DeLorean, right? And when we say Ready Player One, really what we're talking about is that entire ecosystem, right? And then all the cosplay, and then the actual, all the references inside of that book and all of the Easter eggs and all of the things that kind of sprung from that world. And if you realize, like, there's so much stuff there that to enter into the world of Ready Player One, like, what's the right way to do it? So if I started talking about Gunters, right? Gunters are these people that are just dying to know about pop culture. And in the future, it's going to be really important. So you should go back and watch all these 80s shows. We should be talking about how Bob Saget just died. We should be really thinking about that stuff because in the future, that's what's going to be most important, according to Ready Player One. Is that the story of Ready Player One? Like, it's so complicated. So to be able to build those worlds really responsibly, why not think about organizing all those touch points from the beginning? So don't write a book, don't make a movie, don't make a VR experience. Like, come up with the word Gunter and just become one or just write down what it is. And like, this is enough to start a narrative, because if you put that out there and start inviting people to build the world, you've got this collective interactive experience. that's like bread stapled to trees, right? But instead of being something that's inherently stupid, you've got this beautiful platform, this springboard that you can start to build a story world around. That's really cool.
Okay, so if I'm hearing, or if I'm understanding correctly, what you're advocating for is don't try to rush forward, because trying to rush it could almost ruin the experience, and there will be inherently a lot of flaws on the way there, because there's so much and it's so complicated and it's so new and it's so crazy. There's almost no way to do it in the most optimal way. The better way is to start from the beginning and start with providing a few building blocks and invite everybody in, so we can all start to build together with the building blocks first and then move forward from there.
Absolutely. And to put a really fine point on it, one of the challenges, I think, with content, story, narrative in general is that we are in a point where the experts in the media are the ones who are kind of claiming to be the experts at the story. So a good example is like, online video best practices would tell you that the first 4 seconds of the video need to be the hardest hitting so that you get people's attention, which doesn't align with any storytelling in the history of humankind. However, it's very good for the internet machine, but it's bad for story, right? Mm-hmm. So that's because the people who've built the platforms are saying, here's how to use our platform. What I would advocate for, if you want to create something, be it a game or really anything interactive, forget about the technology, right? And just focus on what's right for the thing you're making. And I'm a huge card pen person because it's the easiest medium to create a nonlinear experience, right? It's really hard in a word processing program to do that. It's really hard to do that in Miro and stuff like that. So how do you start really simple and then only use technology when it's required? If you're like, the only way I can do this is in augmented reality, that's how I can manifest the magic, then it's the right time to involve the technology.
Oh, that's such a cool way to look at it. So from the perspective of long-term, the best way to go about creating, because it is a revolution, and this is, I believe, the metaverse and this technology and the blockchain, I think it's all going to fundamentally change a lot of things. But I also agree with you completely that if we don't do it right, there are going to be a lot of problems. And then we may see a lot of issues that we're currently seeing, that we're like migrating to this new technology for just be recreated in almost a more powerful way. Like, for example, well, what if we all end up in Facebook's metaverse, and then instead of having ads on our phone, they're like ads bombarding us at all time? We're like, oh my God, I'm trapped in a fucking digital prison of ads. Like, that would not be good. So from the perspective of helping the most quality, the best projects, the best stories, helping those rise to the top, the true quality, let that surface over time, is the starting from walking with the building blocks, is that going to win in the end from the perspective of having the most influence on the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years of humanity? Or is it?
Yeah. So that's where the idea of working with brands, right, and taking what we say is like an activist approach to advertising, I think is really important, because if you make something cool, it always works, right? And if you make something that's worthwhile of people's attention, if you look at how they're engaged and you create something that actually like allows them to hang out and have a great experience, that impact can always really be felt. So I think that like part of it is having a conversation, right? So stuff like this, unpacking, information sharing, getting people to align on like, I am going to create a high friction experience that takes a long time to do, like Breath of the Wild, right? I hate that game. But like, I love that people love it. And I think it's so cool that people get so far into it. It's just like, I'm not there, but like, what a beautiful, special thing. that people are willing to endure that form of storytelling, that patient storytelling, and have that experience, right? So how can we start to build communities around engagement as opposed to building communities around attention? When we build communities around attention, we're talking about influencers, right? Who are showing up and just being like, I'm building an audience, I'm constantly putting stuff out. And the only value really is the content and the audience, and then it gets sold. And there's no value add, right? Brands will pay for the audience to get the attention. The influencers makes the stuff to get the attention. And the people are being fed via the algorithm to just look at stuff. But what does the person get out of it other than a momentary break from real life? Let's get behind creating interactions that create value. Let's say every single time we ask people to do something on the internet, they're going to have an experience. So we talk about not a call to action, but a call to experience, right? No one's ever clicked on a banner ad because they want to learn more. So let's actually create digital experiences with buttons that invite you to do something special. Now, the internet right now is not optimized for those types of experiences, but if enough people are creating them, proving that they have value, then the future will be a place where companies look to create experiences that are richer, look to create experiences that are more engaging, that are more additive, that don't just take your data and like, you know, try to pull you like they're fishing out of a big net, but actually start to create stuff which is rendered in a way to help you discover new ideas.
That's really interesting. I think one of the ways we're going to see this play out, the almost first, like the initial play out, the microcosm that will kind of set the stage, is gaming. I think this is absolutely going to be where we see this happen. And fortunately for us, gamers are very hard to please. Like if it's not a really quality game that's very engaging, I don't think it'll last. At least from the perspective of let's invest our time in quality things. I hope the bad ones don't last and the good ones do, or the bad ones can come around to become good and so on and so forth. So when it comes to game making and building experiences within games and story within games, making it really cool, and trying to ask the question the right way, but like, what is your take on that? How can game makers, core teams building games, build the most epic experiences, taking into account this philosophy of choice and entry points, touch points, and helping guide people to new ideas and really amazing experiences?
So I'm going to give you probably a not satisfying answer, but I'm into being interrogated on the point after I make it, which is like games are more pervasive than just games. Games are everywhere, right? We all have credit card points. We're all being scored on our behavior. We're all used to, you know, getting points, and whether it's followers or whatever. So games are everywhere. And so I think for me, from a creative perspective, when thinking about games, like I don't want to think about games as only video games, for example, or console games or not console games. And within a game, there are many games. So for me, the thing that I find most inspiring is little pieces of storytelling, or what I would call verbal technology, within those games, where it's like, that's a new idea and we actually need that. So I think that there's a big game being built, right? And it's made of pieces of all these games, like the cinema mode in Red Dead Redemption, right? Where they start to expand the map and make it harder to get to a place. So they have to introduce a new functionality, which is passive viewing within an interactive experience, which is insane, right? But like, of course, if I'm going to spend more time here, I need a way to do it. And what it does is take this idea of Westerns, take this idea of these landscapes that the people playing Red Dead Redemption might have no relationship to, but it takes this media idea and applies it to a game. And all of a sudden people are like, this is exactly what I was looking for. If you were to ask them 5 minutes before it happened and you were like, do you want to take longer for you to get from one game to another and like not be able to control what's happening? They've been like, of course not. But then you give them the experience and then they're like, yes, beautiful. There's movies like this. And what'll happen is we'll start to make Westerns that are like Clint Eastwood Westerns, and gamers will be like, this is what I was looking for, right? Another good example is Job Simulator. Is it Jobs? It's like, it's an old VR game, but when you're a cashier, the idea is that you're in a lab simulating jobs because computers and AI have taken over so many human functions that to keep us entertained, we actually go to virtual fake jobs like they're a game, but the AI doesn't know exactly how jobs work. So like everything's a little bit wrong. But one thing that's really cool is to get out of the game, to get into the lab, you have to find what's called the exit burrito, which is a burrito. And then you have to take a bite and it says exit and you have to bite it again. Right? So what's cool about the exit burrito is like bread stapled to trees. It doesn't make any sort of sense, but within the game experience, like what do people love? Burritos, right? So a burrito is a fun way to do something. And in a game, you can be like, okay, are you sure you want to exit? Right? And it can be written on the screen, or you can be really immersive and be like, you know what? Fuck it. We're not going to write down, do you want to exit? Are you sure? Y/N. We're going to make a burrito and you have to take a bite and it's going to say exit in salsa and you bite it again. Same experience, but written into a world where all of a sudden the bread staple to the tree starts to take on its own idea and become the most natural way to explore a world. So that is my very long, annoying answer to like, yeah, individual games, cool, but like games in general, everyone's got these little pieces of information that pull together, creating a culture that is going to be ultimately, when we're all wrapped in technology, the pervasive game that we play all the time. And all those rules will be how we figure it out.
So is it more, I really want to extract some lessons for the game makers that are listening, and also candidly the people who are looking to invest in those games, both as players and investors. I mean, you know, is it going to be the game that is able to maybe not have the greatest graphics or the top notch this, but to build in these interesting like little mini rabbit holes and really cool interactions within the game that are just new and fun and more interactive than before? Is that kind of what the lesson to be learned is here?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And the way that I would think about it is I think about interaction design as art where you have to prove something, right? So if you can create things that people need, which is also what advertising is, right? Creating things that people need that when they get to a choice, they're like, oh, thank God I get to do that. Then you're creating a game which has that feeling of wish fulfillment. So when you're designing experiences, if you're confronted with a moment and it's like, what would be cool to do right now? Put the pencil down and walk away, right? You've got the wrong context for your game. You should create a world where it's like, what will people need to do right now if left to their own devices? What must happen? And then give them the hardest possible choice. And that is how you create a great game. If you Google first frame, last frame, you'll find a bunch of memes about how basically every film, if you take the first frame of the film and the last frame of the film and put them next to each other, are two versions of the same picture. And it's something that's just native to us, the way we create stories. But if you think about it, the first picture is your protagonist, your hero, the maker of choice. And the last picture is the impact of that choice on that protagonist. And you'll see that the last one and the first one, you can see the journey, right? And the journey is the story. The farther the journey, the better the story. The more interesting and crazy the choice that started the journey, the better the story. So if we think about games, not based on things we already know, not based on like the best practices, but like what are the hard choices we can give people so that they can do the thing that they most need to do, I think that's really cool.
I think we've all experienced that feeling of getting a need met within an experience that we didn't realize we were craving.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know I know one of the games that really did that for me growing up was World of Warcraft. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that it struck a nerve, and I to this day, I can't quite put my finger on what exactly it did so right
Mm-hmm.
in especially in the early stages. But I think exactly what you're saying of, like, when we as taking the perspective of, like, making games or building a game or building an experience, if we're able to give people that feeling and that experience, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, that's a game changer. My next question, is it about then once we give them a difficult decision,
Mm-hmm.
how do you then keep it going? Because, like, do you then give them an even more difficult decision, or do you give them a difficult decision in a different context and there's
Right.
progression? Like, how do we think about that?
So just to unpack, like when we say difficult, not necessarily difficult in interface, but a challenge, right? So to be really pragmatic, first of all, when creating a choice in a game or any experience, you don't want the choice to be like would you like to go um, through this door or this door? Because then you choose it and you go through the door and there's no reward there.
Mm.
You want to obfuscate the outcome of the choice. So the first part of the choice should be, and I'm making this up related to no game at all, but it's, do you want to test your wits or do you want to be celebrated as a hero? Now, what's hard there is like, well, both of them, right? And I don't know if I'm really going to be celebrated or if it's going to be fake. And test your wits sounds like more fun and probably in the world of a game, like it's going to be a better thing. Then when I click, I walk through a door. And when I walk through that door, that choice has contextually created drama in the door. Now I realize this isn't a door. This is the beginning of an experience.
It's a
Right?
portal.
Hard choice because I don't know what's going to happen. Right? But they're both compelling and they both seem like the right choice. That's a hard choice. The other thing around a choice is like there's really crazy choices in games. You can do magical stuff and fly around and do all sorts of crazy stuff. But as proven by GTA, it's the really simple things that are the most exciting. So like it's time to plug in your phone in the world of a game. It is really crazy to think about because you're like, how is this going to happen? Right? In real life, it's totally boring. So if you can take a totally normal thing from real life, the sock puppet, the simple action, the how do I get out of here, right? Those simple little things, and just try to paint them in a way which makes sense in the world of the story, then all of a sudden people are constantly feeling engaged, constantly feeling surprised. And they're thinking, unlike real life, where it's like, I have to do this boring thing and I have to do this boring thing. They're like, everything's amazing, right? Because I'm in a magical world where every choice is incredible. I'm sort of ranting, so I'll just land the plane with this. And this would be my biggest kind of takeaway is when the context of your game is really exciting, I think it's hard to do a great job all the time because you're kind of missing the opportunity to have these little beautiful choices. But if you accept this truth that you can't have a great story and a great interactive experience at the same time, then all of a sudden it'll change the way that you're thinking about your premises. Like if you're thinking about great stories, you're like wizard and dragons and spaceships and murder, right? But if you're thinking about a great interactive experience, it's Zork time. You're like standing in a thing and you can walk and figure it out. Like Zork is beautiful because it's so simple. And it's because like very rudimentary things, choice by choice by choice. So I would advocate for us to focus some attention there because that's where you're really going to come up with big, beautiful, magical choices, even if the game itself doesn't have this like big grand concept. it'll feel more like real life. It'll be more immersive. It'll be more emotional, and it'll blow people's minds.
Okay, so question then,
Mhm.
and also I love this idea of like the different choices with various outcomes and you're not quite sure. To me, I immediately thought of character select. You
Mhm.
may have 8 character types that you could choose from, or 8 different, like you could be an orc, you could be an elf, you could be a
Mhm.
this, you could be a dragon, and you don't really know what this means. But there are
Mhm.
lots of consequences that you'll figure out later down the road as things happen. But I still think a good story is really important, and having these really interesting choices, it's clearly very important. What if there was a way, and I want to try to combine everything and see if it's possible here, at least get your
Mhm.
take on it, where we, thinking from the game maker perspective, what if we set out in the beginning to create an interesting framework that then we can empower the players, the gamers, to be the protagonists, to write our collective gamer story together through posing interesting and difficult questions.
So I'm into it. And I think that it makes sense, right? Um, by the way, my daughter hit me by accident with some ice this weekend. So if I have my nose starts bleeding or something, tell me because I just felt it. It wasn't her fault. We were just messing around. Fortnite is a bus falling out of the sky, right? Anything can happen. What a dramatic entry point. But the world dies every single time, and then it is reinvented. Great interactive experience, great premise for interaction, high stakes, very clear, and the skins obviously at the customization of your character is really important. But it's an incredibly short little world. If you're going to create a game which is really expansive, I do think you have to make a choice. Am I going to let people take this story wherever it must go? Or am I going to try to create a world where they have to follow a certain path? And that's why, like at the end of the day, cutscenes are a band-aid, right? Cutscenes are a way to be like, cool, good job with the choices, but now like, here's definitely what happened.
Right.
No more choices. Watch it like a movie. And now do whatever you want. And we all know that like there aren't an infinite amount of choices. I love the idea through the lens of the metaverse that, for example, what if you started your day and you were like, today I'm not going to be tired? That's it. I'm not going to make any choices that relate to me being tired. That could transform your day, your life in such serious ways because it's an incredibly interesting interactive experience, but it is such a boring story.
Right. So wait, can you keep going on this though? Like, is there a way though for the people to almost carve out, and the gamers to carve out their own story through the lens of, maybe we make a decision making framework that enables you to
Mhm.
make decisions, and that's the game mechanism, but you create the story. Like, you have a group of, like, you have some factions that are set up. Maybe the factions decide to come together and they create like a third faction, because there's like interfactional love and so on and so forth. But they're
Mhm.
really creating their own thing. And it's like, okay, well, we're going to go out and conquer this kingdom over here. And then we're going to just decide to, set up a whole stronghold. And then, we want to go release the dragons on this other group and blah, blah, blah. Like, does
Right.
that have possibility there?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, and I think that can be fun all the time. When we talk about the freedom to make choices, it's like, what if you want to fall in love, right? And you're not going to fight the dragon at all. At the end of the day, most game experiences that are pushing you along a story path are going to be like, cool, you can't fall in love, you have to fight the dragon. Like, and those are amazing experiences. But through the lens of the metaverse, right? When you talk about being immersed and you become the protagonist, the story's too big because it's as long as your life is, right? It's as long as your legacy is, and it's your own personal data. that's in this narrative. So when you're in Planet Facebook or Planet Google or Planet wherever else, like you're going to be doing banal activities for points. And that'll be an incredible interactive experience, but it's going to be a lame story. I'll give you 2 examples of things that I think are really interesting convergences. In Fallout 4, there's, and spoiler alert, you customize the face of yourself, and then in the bathroom, you customize the face of your partner, who then is murdered, like almost immediately. And you can spend like half an hour making this person exactly how you want them, and then they're murdered. Now, why would the game designers, I don't know, why would they give you the chance to customize the person? For me, that is a version of falling in love, right? It's a version of creating a person that you want. So when they die, you're like, oh, now
No.
it's motivated by the fact that like I spent half an hour doing that. But from a story perspective, you're feeling the sense of loss, and it brings you further into the world. So I do think there are ways in complex, amazing story worlds to build in choices that push the story forward. The other thing, another example is like one behavior in The Sims, where you can kind of create your own world and be whoever you want, is they've seen young people actually build lives that start to come to life as like a closeted identity, right? So maybe in their real life, they're not able to manifest the version of themselves that they feel most comfortable as. So they actually use this video game to start to manifest that reality and be involved in kind of like, whether it's like a same-sex marriage or whatever, so that they can experience this alternate reality. Now, is that the game or is that real life? And those things to me are really interesting because they're so simple, but they start to have like real emotional import. And the last thing I would say is like, I like to play games with headphones on, talking to a friend. So are we racing Forza or are we hanging out? Like, I don't know. Ultimately, the memory is going to be of the partnership we had and the conversation while we were driving. Forza is not a good story, but it's a great mechanic to have a relationship. And I think that's a cool way to think about games.
So I am excited to see how this all plays out as far as like what sort of games get created, what sort of stories are told, what choices we'll have. And it's going to be so fascinating. Do you think that, to bring a Tolkien reference, but the one story to rule them all, or the one game to rule them all, will be the one that figures out how to have both the most epic story and the most epic decisions in one? Or do you think it's just actually impossible?
I like right now, I could just get totally naked, right? I could go upstairs, I could plug up my bath, I could order a pizza, and I could like frisbee it across the street. I could like pin tattoo your name on my arm, and this video would be popular. Because like what happened, right? Real life is the game. Like that is without a doubt. And all of these digital experiences we're playing are happening within the game to rule them all. What I'm advocating for is that each choice you give people in a fictional universe, you're thinking about the real world implications of it. And if we do that, then we're no longer just playing World of Warcraft. We're now, this is like a moment in this larger game. So how can we, and this is where crypto starts to become really interesting, how do these points result in currency that result in purchase, that result in real value that we take from world to world? Because that ultimately is when real life becomes a game where you can insert choices hidden inside of these game worlds, hidden in real life, that start to manifest in all these fictions. And ultimately, that's the building blocks of Ready Player One, right? There isn't a single game in Ready Player One. There's all these different games, but it's all real life. And the bad version of that is we're in the stacks. The good version of that is it feels like the dance party in the Sega Matrix, which is a bad example, but you get what I'm saying.
Right. Right.
like where anything can happen.
So then what happens when we introduce AI into this mix where it can be both a player, not a player, but like a character in the story, but also I imagine eventually it's going to be part of the game maker piece as well, to where it's like influencing things and making things happen. How does that change all of what we're talking about, if at all?
So I'm kind of stealing a Jaren Lanier thing here, but like I'm gonna go ahead and say that I don't believe in AI. I do believe that algorithms can process information and you can use machine learning to generate stuff. But when we rely on the algorithm as a creative partner, it only knows to do one thing, which is to efficiently give us what we already like. And the problem with that is the opposite of creativity, right? TikTok, in many ways, is training us to be derivative. So when it's like a fine line between the TikTok algorithm and an NPC, right? It's like, this isn't really a conversation. I'm getting through the responses and trying to win the game. But just because it takes on a human form and how I interact with them doesn't mean that it's a human. So I would just say, like, when we say AI, we have to think about the application of it. Is it an infinitely generated world? Well, we've already seen that an infinitely generated world requires a lot of structure in it. So yeah, the world's as big as we want it to be, but you have to give me games and stuff to do. So I don't know that AI will functionally ever be like a creator, but I do think that it can, be a generator of spectacle. It can make crazy stuff really quick, and that'll be super fun. But it's still up to humans who understand like pathos and feelings and structure to be like, yo, this choice is going to be so crazy. People are going to bug out. Like an AI is never going to be able to do that. An AI could be like, people have previously bugged out at choices like this, but it's not, unless it's like randomly doing it and it gives it to like 400,000 different people and one of them has a good experience and the rest are like, that didn't make any sense.
That would be funny. That would actually be a really interesting experiment to see what would happen there. Because like now I'm picturing, okay, what if there's one piece of technology that's building out the perimeter of the world, and it's just endlessly expanding it, and like it could be like based on what existing users are interacting with the most, it can learn from that and generate more things similar to that as the world expands. And then you could almost have another one that's coming in on top of it, and like, okay, these are the types of games that people are giving off the sentiments that I'm trained to figure out are the most fun. And so then it's like recreating things like that. But then it almost feels like it's just like rinsing and repeating what's already happening.
Right, which is what computers can do really well. I think that, again, like if you think like what brings you joy, it's like Malcolm Gladwell has this great thing about the difference between, like, he says, like, what Google does isn't really search for anything, because searching from a human history perspective was about going to look for something and finding stuff along the way. So a computer doesn't really help you discover things along the way. Like I've said previously, like there's no generative experience or VR experience where you're leaving like Bergdorf Goodman and trip over a homeless man, because there's no serendipity in a digitally created environment, because it doesn't know how to accidentally do anything. It doesn't know, unless you tell it to, how to take two things that are very different and put them together to create an insight. That's the poetry of it all. Now, once you do that, a computer can emulate it. But I'm much more interested in, like we said a second ago, treating the computer like the world's like craziest riffer. So we've built some digital tools that allow you to play with AI so that it opens your perspective by showing you stuff that is like very unrelated than what you are thinking. And that can be really powerful, but it's not doing a good job. It's never doing a good job. It's always trying and failing. which can be creatively inspiring, but I think it's bad probably for games. It's
So
like
So I know we're coming close to time here, and I kind of want to scope out a little bit and talk more just from a base creative layer of humanity and people. I'm fascinated by the idea of creating new things and original content and just being really creative as people and producing.
Mhm.
What advice can you give us as people to really touch the most creative parts of who we are and
Mhm.
help bring that to the surface?
The I have like a little mnemonic just about technology, given the nature of this conversation, and then I have some practical advice for all humans. One is that if you um, think about pizza. Pizza is an incredible piece of innovative technology if you think of it as spaghetti with a handle, right? Because like spaghetti is delicious, but it's like very hard to eat and it's like annoying and it's messy and you can't get everything you want. Pizza is just spaghetti with yeast in it in a different form, and you can walk with it, you can see what you're eating. It's like way better, right? From an interaction perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So you have the ability to improve on, be creative, and innovate absolutely everything with zero skill or zero knowledge if you simply approach it from the beginning, right? So a lot of people think about innovation as like, what's next? What's next? What haven't we done? What has yet to be done? I think about innovation as what could we have done better, right? Go back to that thing and just reimagine it and figure out, well, like if I were to start from scratch on something like a keyboard, right? On something like how I start a conversation, which is what the and is, the ring light, which is in my face right now. If you start from the beginning around like what you were trying to achieve, you will invent it in a different way. And that creative exercise always works, right? And you'll always come up with something that takes the current framework and improves on it because you're smarter and you're doing it for the second time, not the first. The other thing is like sometimes people wonder like if you want to write, like how do you write? It's like really hard and everything. The key to writing anything is like don't say like every day I'm gonna write for 2 hours, because you can't. All you can do is like be for 2 hours. But if you say every day I'm gonna write 50 words, then you're treating it like a commodity, and then you can hold yourself accountable. And that's how you have to approach creativity. Creativity is not magic. Creativity is not like a special skill. There's no such thing as a genius. What creativity is the practical application of whatever you're thinking onto a piece of paper. Once you've done that, then you figure out how to make it, right? And I can't emphasize it enough. Like if you want to be creative, like leave your computer. It is too good at too many things. Get a piece of paper, and like I like these Sharpies. They're skinny on one side, they're fat on the other, and I have about 40 of them right next to me. And when I want to do something, I start in a piece of paper. I make a square and I fill it in. And that's it. That's my recommendation.
I love it. Nathan, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really do appreciate it. Know you're a busy man doing a lot of really cool things, and yeah, thank you for everything that you're doing, and for being a pioneer in a lot of different spaces, and for sharing your time. Thank you.
I super appreciate it. It was a fun conversation. Thanks.
You're the man. To everybody watching and listening, thank you. I'll see you all on the next episode.